Okay, so with that, I'll get started. My name is Salem Bush. I work in the Department of Planning and Development at Fairfax County, and as you all may know, staff in the county is working on an update to the policy plan of the comprehensive plan. And so there's a bunch of different elements. We'll get into sort of how the whole comprehensive plan works and sort of how the policy plan fits in. But today's meeting really is to focus in on the introduction chapter and then even more specifically the goals of the comprehensive plan, which are in that introduction chapter. And those goals provide the basis and framework for the rest of the elements of the policy plan. So they inform the objectives and the policies throughout the entire comprehensive plan. So with that, I'm going to share my screen with you all and start the presentation. All right, so just to give an agenda overview, we'll talk about how the purpose of the comprehensive plan works again. We'll talk about project timeline for the overall policy plan. And we'll talk about the introduction and draft goals, and then there'll be some time for questions and discussion, and then some more follow-up information for you all to get in contact with us if you have any comments or questions as the project continues. So the policy plan amendment, as directed by the board, the goals of a complete policy plan update are to review and update and streamline the existing policy plan elements, add new policy plan elements as needed, and ensure the policy plan is in alignment with the countywide strategic plan, the One Fairfax policy, and other recently adopted policies and initiatives. So we are in phase one. The overall policy plan has been split up into a couple different phases because we are looking at really the entire policy plan update. And so the first phase is what we're in right now. And so we are looking at the introduction, the preface chapter, the land use chapter, the transportation, environment, parks and recreation, equity, community health, and human services. So we're in that phase now. Once we complete phase one, we'll then move on to phase two, which are the remaining elements of the policy plan. So the purpose of the comprehensive plan and kind of how it works with all the other regulatory documents, it's a top-down approach. So the comprehensive plan provides countywide guidance on the land use vision, along with the goals, objectives, and policies to achieve the vision. And then the comprehensive plan area volumes are another part of the comprehensive plan. They provide specific guidance and consideration to ensure compatible development within identified areas. And then, of course, the zoning ordinance is established through the comprehensive plan that regulates land use and implements comprehensive plan for the orderly and controlled development of the county. And then we get even more specific with the public facilities manual, which provides guidelines governing the design of new development. That one is used more in the site plan process. So what we're really here today is to really focus in on the policy plan update in the introduction chapter. So just to give you a project timeline, again, this authorization occurred in 2022. We have been working very closely with the Planning Commission as well on this update, and they actually established a policy plan committee that we have been meeting with regularly to go through this update. In the very beginning, we did figure out that we were going to work on this on a phased approach, and so we identified those topics that were most important to start working on now. And then we did a policy plan audit of the comprehensive plan, really comparing, talking about kind of what's working in the county and certain elements, and then also kind of looking at that and how it's compared to the strategic plan which the county adopted, which we'll get into as well, and comparing the goals of that to what we have in the comprehensive plan. So, and then earlier this year and into the spring, we started the internal research for this policy plan update. We developed an outreach plan that was finalized with the Planning Commission, and then we've been holding regular routine policy plan committee meetings with the Planning Commission. And then May through June of 2024, we did hold a meeting with the Board of Supervisors and also a joint BAC and Planning Commission committee meetings. And then gave more information on this on the outreach phase as well. And then from June through December of 2024, we started our outreach phase. There we held a number of community meetings, some in person, some virtual, where we introduced the policy plan elements to the community and started giving the community an idea of our strategy of updating the plan. And then going into next year, we are looking at another community check-in phase, getting more community feedback. We will be also reporting back on the draft plan guidance, and then also the policy development and outreach will continue. And then we are continuing to update the Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission committee meetings. And then towards the end of this year, end of summer, and into fall of this coming year, we will be doing more policy refinement, and we will begin developing those staff reports for each of these elements and taking that through the approval process. So that is the plan going forward. So to zero in on the introduction chapter of the policy plan, again, like I said earlier, the introduction chapter provides like the framework for the rest of the comprehensive plan. It kind of provides the history and background of sort of how land use planning has evolved in Fairfax County. It has some various sections, including the land use vision and goals, but it also has sections on the history chapter of how land use has evolved in the county. And then there's another section on implementation, plan monitoring, citizen participation. So we're working on updating all these sections of the chapters, and we've been meeting and discussing how to update those. But right now our focus is really on the land use vision and goals, again, because those will directly translate to work that we're doing on the other elements. And so we'll be coming back to the Planning Commission and to the board on some of those other sections of the introduction chapter, and we'll continue providing community input meetings on that as we go forward as well. One thing that we are looking at doing, just to give you an idea of some of those other sections that we're looking at doing, we are looking right now, the introduction really is more for the policy plan itself, but we do want to provide more of an introduction to the entire comprehensive plan and sort of tie those area plans that I mentioned earlier to the policy plan and kind of how that works through the concept for future development throughout the county. And then another thing that we're looking at doing for the history of land use planning in Fairfax County is tying the narrative of that history to some of the goals that we are drafting and now that I'll share with you all, establishing. So especially looking at like things like equity. Equity is going to be a new goal that we have. And so telling the history of equity in the county and getting that background about why that goal is so important, but we'll look at the other goals as well, the other elements really, which are housing, transportation, and environment. So talking about that history, updating that history, and modernizing some of the language will be something that we'll be looking at as well. So with that, just to give some background on the existing policy plan goals, how those existing goals were identified back in 1973, the Board of Supervisors adopted 16 interim policies, and those were then adopted into the 1975 comprehensive plan for Fairfax County. In 1988, the Board of Supervisors put together a goals commission, which ultimately recommended 18 revised goals, and then ultimately 20 goals were adopted. And I think one thing I will point out is that currently the introduction states that the goals are comprehensive, encompassing every aspect of Fairfax County government, but not limited merely to the planning function. Implementing some aspects of the goals is beyond the legislative mandate of the Planning Commission and the purview of the comprehensive plan. However, because the planning function is so far-reaching, it is critical to use the goals as the basis for forming countywide planning policy. Therefore, the goals for Fairfax County have been provided the strategic focus for objectives and policies of the comprehensive plan. I think this is an important statement. In some ways, if you look at the goals now, they do go kind of beyond some land use planning. These initial goals were established before the county had a strategic plan, which we have now adopted. And so part of this process is aligning that new strategic plan and focusing those goals more kind of on land use planning. So with that, these are the existing goals of the comprehensive plan. Like I said, there's 20 goals. In general, the goals are still well suited to provide general direction on land use policy for the comprehensive plan. However, the county has changed significantly since 1988. That warrant a review of these goals. There's been things like population growth, development patterns have changed. There's been a lot of demographic changes, definitely an evolving economy. And also the strategies and how we think about land use planning have shifted. So best practices and things like that. So really the thought here is modernizing these goals, taking what works with these goals and including it in the new goals, but also really looking at the goals with an eye on the strategic plan that the county has now adopted. And so again, the county adopted the strategic plan in 2021. And this plan talks about how important it is to be used as the framework to align and integrate its strategy into other countywide plans. And so as part of this initial work that staff did with the policy plan update, so staff conducted an audit of the comprehensive plan and its alignment with the strategic plan. And within the strategic plan, it identifies 10 community outcome areas that are the top priority issues to address within the county. And so these 10 community outcome areas have provided the basis for developing new goals along with the existing goals that we have. Again, here, this really shows how that audit was, just in a very high level, conducted to kind of compare sort of how the existing goals, which are on the x-axis of the screen, compare to and align with the strategic plan goals that are part of the 10 community outcome areas for the county. So I do want to talk about sort of the staff process so far and what we've done, how we've worked. We've had a lot of meetings to discuss this. We've had a lot of different agencies involved in this update. So there's been a lot of review at the staff level, at the planning commission level, and we will be meeting with the board here in a couple weeks as well to go over all this. But one thing that we did was we did establish a subcommittee that was a subcommittee made up of staff specifically to look at the introduction chapter. So we had a series of meetings to discuss the strategy of that update and then also to start providing revisions on those draft goals. So we started writing the draft goals and then shopping those goals around with other agencies and other groups within staff, and then we met and talked about revisions and provided those as well. And so throughout that entire process too, we've been meeting with planning commission liaison check-ins. So there's a couple planning commissioners that are appointed to each element update. And so we've been having check-ins. The actual chairman and the vice chair of the planning commission are the liaisons for this introduction chapter. So we've been meeting with them routinely. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we did have outreach phase 1 in the spring and summer of this year. So 4 in-person meetings and 2 virtual meetings. And then we've also had a policy plan topic leads review, which is really made up of all the staff in the county that's updating those elements, the different elements. And so we've been taking this draft text through them to get comments and revisions. Because they're the ones that are really going to be updating the other plans, the other elements in the plan. So we need to make sure that these goals align with some of the things that they're thinking about updating in their elements. So throughout that whole process, we've gone through a lot of review with our branch chiefs within the planning division, and then also our management within the Department of Planning and Development. And then we, like I said, a few weeks ago, we did have a check-in with the Planning Commission on these updates and got some feedback from the PC. I do want to mention some of the key themes that have been developed through this review process. So through all those meetings and through all those updates, I think there are some things to point out that kind of came out of all that review. And one, which is a pretty obvious one I mentioned a lot today, but that's, again, everyone was in agreement that whatever we do going forward needs to be aligned with the countywide strategic plan. The other thing, we do not currently have a land use vision statement for the comprehensive plan or for land use planning. And so we thought it was a good idea to develop a land use vision statement, and which I'll share with you here in just a minute. And then we also wanted to make sure that the goals should be very visionary. They should set a very high level expectation of what we want the county to be in the future. And then we also wanted to establish an overarching land use goal. That was like the first goal of all the goals. And then there are some new goals that are in here that aren't really in the original comprehensive plan, particularly equity. That's a new thing that's been established through the One Fairfax policy and also through the strategic plan. And so we knew we wanted to establish a new goal for equity and also a goal for healthy communities. And then one thing that came out of a lot of discussions that we've had is that we wanted to make sure the transportation goal is more focused on urban design concepts such as streetscape and multimodal design. And then last but not least, we wanted to recognize and establish a tone that all the goals are interrelated and should not be considered outside the context of other goals. And so this really goes in line also with the elements. So the same can be said for the different elements of the comprehensive plan. They're all interrelated. They're all important. One is not more important than the others. And you really can't think about these topics without the consideration of the others. And that's kind of how we review projects here at the county. We have a lot of different review agencies that focus on certain topics, and so all those kind of get pulled together in our review process when we're looking at new plan amendments, or we're looking at development review or entitlements for zoning entitlements to the county. So with that, this is the draft land use vision that we've drafted and is ready for review for everybody. So I'll read it out loud. The county will plan for growth by providing diverse housing options, ample employment opportunities, and essential services for all people. Healthy environments and communities will be designed to be safe, walkable, and well connected by multimodal transportation options, and include vibrant, cultural, and recreational spaces that ensure a high quality of life for everyone. And I think one thing that is reflected in this vision statement is that what we tried to do is to try to have some reflection to the 10 community outcome areas that's part of that strategic plan that is referenced here in this vision statement. And so the individual goals, so there's 8 individual drafted goals that focus on land use, equity, housing, healthy communities, access to arts, culture, recreation, and lifelong learning, the environment, economic opportunity, and urban design and transportation. And so we do have the individual, so of course with these goals, these are the titles of the goals, but we do have a narrative for each one of these, and I won't run through read through the entire narrative, but I did want to point out a couple of things. So the first one is the one that deals with the land use. And so we just wanted to make sure we had the overarching goal of land use in as the first goal of the goals. And so again, you can see some of the things that I talked about earlier with the introduction chapter, connecting this goal more to the county's concept for future development and lands classification system, and that connects again to the area plans where we're kind of reviewing individual parts of the county. And then again, we do have a new goal here, and this is to advance equitable development and land use planning. It's very much in line with the One Fairfax policy. And so I'll let you all take a look at that one, but that's the new goal. At the end of this too, we can jump in if anybody has any particular questions about the individual goals. And then we do have a goal on housing, which is prioritizing access to affordable housing. And again, our priority is still to focus a lot of the development throughout the county in the mixed use centers and the activity centers, and that's part of the concept for future development. However, we do understand that there is a need for housing in other parts of the county as well. And so we do have this goal here. And then we also have, like I mentioned earlier, there's a new goal to promote health through land use planning. And so this one is a new goal. I know we've gotten some comments from the public about making sure that people have access to healthy foods. We realize that some places there are food deserts in the county, and so that's one aspect of promoting health through land use planning. And then another goal, again, this is very similar to the original goal that we had in the comprehensive plan, which is to provide access to arts, culture, recreational, and lifelong learning. And then we do have a longer goal here for environmental sustainability. I think you'll see a lot of information here related to climate change and addressing the effects of climate change and resiliency and things of that nature. And then we have another long goal here for economic opportunity and resiliency. And this goal, we're actually working with our Department of Economic Initiatives to take a look at this one. So we're coordinating with them on this goal. But it's pretty similar, I would say, to the original economic opportunity goal that we have in the comp plan currently. But we've added a few more things in here as well. So, and lastly, the last goal that we have here is, again, this is really the transportation goal, but we've kind of reframed it in a more to think about transportation through urban design. And so this includes the integration of public facilities and utilities, open space, arts, and amenities. So it's really looking at the streetscape, looking at all those kind of things that deal with transportation outside of just the vehicle, although of course the vehicle is still very important. It's still part of the goal, but it's a part of it as opposed to just including the pedestrian access, bicycle access, and thinking about the urban design components. With that, I'll open it up for questions and discussion that folks may have. I'm going to unshare my slideshow for now. If we need to go back into any individual ones, I can open it up for anybody. So with that, does anybody have any questions? I see Larry, you've got your hand up. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you because I've sat on a number of these, and I think that was one of the best presentations that I've seen so far. So thank you. That was very nice. Secondly, I was looking at your draft environment goal, and you had an earlier slide. Actually, you say it here. You say plan for environmental sustainability. The other one says something about sustainability, but in my mind, at least, sustainability does not encompass the scope of the environmental concerns that we should plan for. And so I was just trying to reconcile that in my mind because it's just not clear. Does that make sense, Salem?
Sort of. I don't, if you could elaborate on that, like beyond sustainability. I'm not an environmental planner. We have a lot of environmental planners, and so it's not my forte, but I've certainly, I work with a lot of environmental planners. So if you don't mind, just explain that more so I understand.
Okay, so when I think about sustainability, I think sustainability involves keeping things at least so that they don't degrade, and also so that they can continue. And it may be that the state of the environment is such that we are not meeting certain standards, and or we need to do better on certain things. And I think you're aware of many situations like that where we need to improve on habitat, invasive species, and a whole bunch of other things. And so I think that just keeping things the way they are is probably not the kind of goal that I would want us to set.
Okay.
It seems like we would want to do better than that in some cases, and
Okay.
so that's kind of what I'm thinking about. I think it requires some discussion and back and forth in order to figure out what would work better.
Okay, yeah, I that helps me. I appreciate you clarifying that. Yeah, it's a good point. I think I see where you're coming from, going beyond just sustainability.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see Elaine. I think you were next.
Yeah, I would ditto what Larry just said, because that's a little bit of where my concern is as well, is there are places where things need to be fixed or improved. But here's something that I've attended I've attended one of these meetings for each of the subject areas, not all of them, but at least each subject area. And a picture has been coming to greater and greater clarity in my mind when it comes to city planning and thinking about where we're putting people. We have these new goals to bring urban areas into density, and we are moving into what were commercial properties, residences. We're pushing mixed use into those areas. And the first glaring piece that came up was in our area in Franconia. They want to put an apartment building right abutting a gas station and across from more gas stations. And I brought that issue up. But as I've thought about it, it's a vision, and I'm not exactly sure. It plays into many areas, one of which might be that neighborhood and housing livability. But it seems like maybe in this overarching, there's some place to talk about it. But it's thinking about where you're putting people, even though it may not have a regulation that says you can't, or there may not be a setback from something. There's more than just even gas stations, because I went to this air emissions discussion that Walkinshaw had out in his district, and and I'm thinking, when you put a corridor of transportation like we're doing on Highway 1 and then fill it with people, you're exposing all those people to a dense concentration of air pollution along there. I know we're trying to move to electric and all that, but there's still issues. So it's how we're moving people in. There could be other businesses I'm not even aware of, like dry cleaners or print shops or nail shops or, just all kinds of things that in a little commercial area were okay, but now we're putting housing right in there. There's also the thing of like fire stations. Does that make sense to put an apartment complex next door to a fire station where those people are going to be interrupted all night in their sleep with the fire engines, or emergency rooms at hospitals? I mean, typically right now they're kind of isolated, but as we move people into these areas, because now we're going to build apartments on top of everything, it's something that needs to be looked at, I think, in a strategic kind of view of maybe it's a best practices. I don't know, because like I say, there's no regulation preventing it. But does that make a quality neighborhood? It doesn't seem to meet these other goals I see about beauty and livability and stuff.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think probably for the sake of specificity, I think that type of like your comments and your concerns, I think that probably would relate more to like the land use chapter. And I'm assuming you've probably been to maybe that meeting. I know they've already had a couple of those. And so like when they're creating those like policies, there could be some policies that could be created out of kind of what you're talking about. Although I'm not sure about the ones dealing with pollution. I mean, I think that's probably somewhat regulated by the state and federal government in terms of like the gas emissions and things like that. Although I do see your point about like where residential uses should go and the compatibility with other residential uses or other commercial uses or not being compatible with those types of things. And so I think from like the kind of high level policy plan standpoint, we are like, I think we have that language in here, but I think like once we get more specific into the policy plan, like in the land use section, where there'll be more very specific policies, at least from the level of the comprehensive planning point of view, there could be some changes made there that you're kind of talking about. So I'm assuming hopefully you've got some of those comments to the planners that are doing the land use planning section, but I can be sure to communicate those to them as well, that's come up. I took notes down on what your comments are.
Yeah, I have, but as I've listened to more of these meetings, it's growing in my mind of unacceptable places to live, like next door to. Like the fire stations was occurring to me as I was driving through there the other day. So just, yeah. Okay. Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that there was going to be a meeting with the board to go over all of this. What did you mean by the board and when is that?
Yeah, so it's the board land use process review committee. We are meeting with them. I think it is November 26th, I want to say. I'm just looking at my calendar right now to make sure that's the right date. Yeah, it's November 26th. So we're meeting with the their land use process review committee, and that I believe is at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, November 26th. So what we'll do is
you know where that is?
Yeah, it's at the it's at the main government center building, and I think typically they meet in conference room 11, which is when you come into the building, like the main doors of the building. It's kind of to the left when you come. It's on that entry level floor, and then you go to the left of that. So it's not in their big main board auditorium, but it's a smaller conference room. So conference room 11 is what they call it. And so at that meeting, it'll be very similar to the presentation that we gave to the Planning Commission a few weeks ago. It's very similar to what you're hearing today. Probably a bit shorter because they'll have other things on the agenda, but yep. So that'll be that meeting that we're meeting with them on. And I think next is Mark.
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just stumbled across these meetings, so this is the first one I've been to, and I think the first time I'm aware of it. Just some quick observations. I'm beginning to realize that opportunity, housing opportunity, diversity, equity opportunities come from improved business, having a strong business base. Promoting taxes comes from promoting a strong business base when we're saying we have too much from residential tax. So my first thought was on reading the draft land use vision statement. It says the county will plan for growth by providing diverse housing options, ample employment opportunities, and essential services for all people. And then, I read the economic draft goal, and I said, providing ample employment opportunities, that's like focused on the individual, but there's nothing in the vision statement about providing ample business opportunities. So I would propose an amendment to say the county will plan for growth by providing diverse housing options, ample business and employment opportunities, and essential services for all people. That was my first comment. Really
Okay.
promoting again the economic, and I think parts of the county realize this. I mean, reality when the Board of Supervisors approved the data center strategy, they are promoting data centers, realizing that they have to be integrated into the county well, and there are challenges with that, but still, and also the desire to help people start small businesses, then everything in between, you've got to be able to promote that business. So that would be the first comment. The second comment that I have, and I don't know where it fits, but just as a comment, is I look at my own neighborhood and I realize, and I also drive around the county, and I realize that infrastructure involves a lot of things, but it also involves provisioning of utilities.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of change in utilities. And the last time I looked, I think the policy plan section on utilities really had nothing in it. I mean, it's like there was a title section, and after that, blank pages. So I would strongly consider we take a look at, if we're not already, how are we integrating this also relates to the part about revitalizing older communities and residential areas. What's the planning and integration of, like, between putting in new gas pipes, and you come in and you mill and repave the street, and then 2 months later, they come in and tear the streets up again to put in new gas pipes. And then, 6 months later, they come in and tear up the streets again to put in new stormwater system or something or another. Where is the land use planning for infrastructure for the existing and the to be, and then dealing with all the various technologies, wireless and so forth, and then all the old stuff that's still hanging around, all the old copper that's on poles and things, and the undergrounding. The third item is, I wrote down GIS and digital twin. And you talked a little bit about technology. So my questions and thoughts here are what is the role of, and for the example on the comment about not putting a fire station next to an apartment building, where and how are we using GIS and spatial data for planning, as opposed to we're using it a lot for operating, if you want to know where your property boundaries are, if you want to know, where the sidewalks are, but how about in planning? And there's this concept of a digital twin where you have the as-is digital environment, and it can be three-dimensional. And then you have a digital twin where we actually are putting in and laying out, like, our neighborhood is near Leesburg Pike and Seven Corners. Does anyone actually have a digital twin that's actually beginning to show how the redoing of Route 7 to make it having sidewalks on both sides, and having the bus and the bicycle and other access, how that's all going to work out with respect to the existing structures and buildings and things, so that we're using technology to help us do advanced planning and land use. And then I was just overseas in Italy, and actually the town that we were in, there was a conference on future of the cities, and it was in an old town in Italy. And as I look at the oldness, in some cases maintaining oldness and historical is part of the just the whole culture. And so when we talk about revitalizing older communities and residential areas, there's also an element of needing to maintain. those areas for their historical and appearance value, and not necessarily replacing everything. What does it mean to revitalize older residential areas and communities, especially when we look at cities that are examples for the way to do city planning, to actually have things that are from the 14 and 1500s.
Yeah, good comments. Thanks, Mark. There's a lot there. I just want to go through kind of one by one, try to acknowledge your comments and address them as best I can. So I guess one of your first things was about kind of utilities and how we think about utilities and land use planning. So it is, like you mentioned, I think you were looking at the public facilities section of the element for the policy plan. And so we do have a section in there on utilities. We are somewhat limited based on state, federal regulations about how much regulation and review we can do on certain utilities. And so that's where some of the plan is lacking guidance on, I would say. So there's a lot of public facilities that we as the county or our agencies in the county look at establishing either new facilities or expanding facilities. And so they go through a process and you were asking about GIS and mapping and stuff. And so they do a lot of real estate assessments. They do some GIS mapping to determine the best locations for them. But a lot of it is opportunity, as you know. Trying to find available land for some of these spaces is a huge challenge, from just the space needed, but also from a financial standpoint. So that's part of the analysis that our agencies do when they're looking at new spaces for facilities. But utilities, there's different types of utilities, and we have some regulatory control over some of them. Some of the utilities that we have, like for water infrastructure and sewer infrastructure, things like that, we have a lot of control over. We're the ones that build a lot of that infrastructure. Some of the other utilities, like, for example, like electrical transmission lines, or utilities like the gas lines, we don't have much, we don't really have much purview over the review or the approval of those. Those are more federally and state regulated. So we don't have a lot of guidance on those because we just don't have a lot of purview on those. But as far as like the question too about like when they're kind of like ripping up the sidewalk and pulling out utilities and things like that, and then they need to go back in and repave, I think a lot of that stuff can probably be found in the public what is it called? I mentioned earlier, the PFM, I think it's the Public Facilities Manual that the county uses. And so there should be stuff in there about how paving needs to reoccur or how often they have. And so it's a good point.
The challenge that we have, and just for example, what I've done for our neighborhood is we reached out, sent letters to Dominion, Washington Gas, Fairfax County, for both stormwater and sewer, and then Fairfax Water. And we just asked them basic questions like, what's the infrastructure in our neighborhood? What's the age of the infrastructure? In some cases, we've been successful. In other cases, I'm still waiting on stuff. We just don't have it. And I think that the county is better equipped to request some of this information. And then when you have it, when you put it all together, because I don't think that the Dominion Energy is working with Washington Gas, and I don't think Washington Gas is working, except when they're actually doing a dig. If they got a dig, then they do 811. But to actually look at the big picture stuff, and I know the federal is not doing it. I know the state utilities, state corporation commission regulates some of this stuff, but again, they're not doing this stuff. It's the local governments that have the best ability to have the visibility and to be asking these questions and even run just some pilot projects. You run a pilot project and pick a neighborhood and try to get the data and begin looking at how does it all fit together. And Fairfax County already has the sewer and the stormwater. You're ahead of us on two of them, and then a lot of work by FCDOT is done with sidewalks and things, and then VDOT's data is all out there. It's all available. Who's going to be the integrator of this? And again, I don't think it's going to be the federal government. I think it's the local government. In our case, that's Fairfax County. You know what I mean?
I think so. I mean, as far as like redoing the infrastructure kind of all at once, it is, I see there is a challenge with getting some of those companies to like work together on some of that stuff. A lot of times I think what you're seeing too is emergency related work, like the stuff that's happening outside of where I live right now, where there was an emergency with the Verizon infrastructure. They came in, they ended up like cutting a line of somebody else by accident, and now they're ripping up the whole sidewalk and the road in front of me. And so that was like a reaction to an emergency, as opposed to like, oh, we're planning for new utilities and infrastructure. So I don't know like all the details of sort of how all that is coordinated, although I'm sure there is some level of coordination that goes on, particularly when like, for example, like when the county is, a lot of the stuff that we're approving is private related infrastructure, right? That goes through a review process. And so when these companies or these developers are going in and redoing, like doing some infill development, those get approved through a site plan process, which is way beyond the comprehensive planning process. But we all have, so as part of that process, there are inspectors that go out and try to make sure that that level of development is being coordinated in some way with the utility companies, so that they're doing it in a way that is coordinated as best that it can be. And so the part of their job is inspecting and going out and doing routine checks to make sure that the infrastructure is being put in the way that it should be. So that's part of the process. Although at this high level of a comprehensive planning process, I don't think we have anything that like really gets at that specific like level of detail in terms of like road construction and things like that. I would say too, to your point about technology and using GIS, we use a lot of GIS in our work. A lot of other agencies that we work with use a lot of GIS. What I guess the way that we probably use it the most within our department specifically is when we are thinking about doing when we do bigger like area planning studies, we are looking at the impacts that those area planning studies are going to be having based on the development that is proposed to come in at like the highest level of potential development. And so when we do that, we're looking at all the infrastructure. And so sometimes that's schools, the number of students that could be projected based on like the number of residential units that could be constructed in a place. It's going to be their street network. It's going to be making sure that we have sewer infrastructure and water infrastructure in those places. And so what we do is we work with all of our agencies on the review of those things. And so they're using a lot of GIS when they're thinking about putting their new facilities, and they have all this stuff mapped out. But the way that we use it a lot is when we're trying to think of our population projections and the actual like number of units or the impacts that we're going to have in certain areas of the county. So hopefully that answered most of your questions. I see is it John McNeil has the hand up still. Thanks for your patience. I know you've been waiting a little while for your question. And if you're trying to talk, I can't hear you, but I see your thing is lit up. Looks like you're muted now. Yeah, I can't hear anything coming through. You're lit up, so I'm not sure. If you want to try to, you could, if we can't hear you, it does sound like we can hear you now. You could try to put your question or comment in the chat as well, and we can try to respond to it. There it is. Is there any public committee you can join? What type of public committee are you looking to join? We have lots of like board appointed committees. That's where you'll see that term BACs. So there's different board appointed committees that the board has where they'll appoint citizens or stakeholders for all kinds of different topics throughout the county. In the case of the work that we're working on now, which is this policy plan update, the community input that we're doing is providing these types of community input meetings, also working with the Planning Commission with their policy plan committee, and determining like the type of outreach, who we're talking to, what types of meetings we're doing, and also working with the board as we go through those meetings and getting feedback from the board. So I don't know if you were looking for a specific committee related to the update that we're talking about today to get involved in the planning process. I can't think of like a specific committee that you could be on. We also, the other thing that we do a lot of times is if we have these bigger projects, some of these area planning studies that we do, there's a couple going on right now at the county level. There's one called the Centerville study. There's another one that I've been working on, which is the Lorton Visioning study. And so those are area-wide plan amendments that we are working on. Those are usually like a couple years process. And so we have task forces that are appointed to those committees. And so those are typically made up of residents and stakeholders of those areas or nearby as we go through planning studies. So there's opportunities when we do bigger planning studies to get involved in the planning process at that type of level where you can be on a task force. So there can be those. I'm not sure where you live or, but one way too is to, is when we start those projects, like we could give you an idea of if we are looking at any work in like the community or area that you live in, we could let you know. Yeah, and Elaine brings up a good point. The supervisor's office for whatever district you live in is always open too. And so they're typically the ones that are appointing citizens to different types of task forces and or the board appointed committees. So you could talk to your supervisor about if there's anything that's going on within your district that you could be a part of. That's another way to kind of look into that question you're asking about as well. I hope that answered your question, Ja. Sorry, your audio is not working. Okay, great. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? I see Elaine's typing too. Okay, thanks for that, Elaine. It looks like you put in a link to the county website where you can get some contact information. I appreciate that. I will share, so just before everybody goes, I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put up on the screen real quick so you guys can see, and I can put this in the chat as well before we leave here. So if you look at my screen, these are some different places where you can learn more about the work that we're doing. You can learn more about the policy plan itself. You can provide comments. I'm going to put this in the chat as well so you all have access to it here. The font's kind of gigantic in here, but if y'all click any of those links, you can find out any information that you might want. And also there's an email there too. If there's anything that comes up after this meeting you want to reach out to us about, or as we're continuing working through this process, just please let us know. With that, if there's no other questions, I appreciate y'all spending your time. I'm glad we could have this lunch style meeting so that some other folks, I know people have busy work schedules, so we usually try to provide some meetings that are at night and provide some meetings during the day so that they can accommodate different people's schedules. So I appreciate y'all taking the time and listening to us and providing your comments as well. So what we'll do is those comments, we'll take them back to our subcommittees and our staff committees that we're working on it and see how we can best address those comments or incorporate some of those comments into the plan text as well. So appreciate everybody's time. I see there's one more message here. Oh, thanks, Larry. I appreciate that. Okay, so again, thanks everybody for your time. With that, we will close the meeting and just let us know if there's anything we can answer after this meeting. Appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.